Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new and very first JAMB Tutor live streaming session. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be talking to you about how to prepare for JAMB 2021 exams. Next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide, please? The theme of today's session is how to prepare for JAMB 2021. The very first thing that you need to know before we need to know before we answer this question is how to prepare for JAMB 2021 is for us to first have a target, as you will see in the next slide. So you have to have a target before you embark on preparing for the JAMB exams. This target can be, say for example, I want to get 180, which is the cutoff score for many of the courses, especially humanities. I want to get, for example, 240, depending on what you want to study in the university and depending on which universities you are going to apply for. The next thing that comes on the list is the plan. You have to have a plan. Just as the saying goes, if you fail to plan, then you are planning to fail. Another thing is that you need to be consistent on the plan that you've drafted. So if you have a plan, then you need to be consistent and stick to that plan that whether it's in the form of a timetable that you set for yourself. Moving on to the next thing on the screen, which says practice, practice, practice. Just as the saying goes, practice makes perfect. So these are the 4 general tips that we'll begin this session with. Moving on to the next slide. Next slide, please. This is a 2 months plan planned by and prepared by JAMB Tutor. So you can, for example, start preparing for the JAMB exams from today, dedicating 2 hours or 2.5 hours per day until the date of the examinations. The examination is going to be held in mid-March. We are not sure about the date. So if you start planning and you spend 2 hours or 2.5 hours every day, then if you calculate that, it will come to about 120 hours to 135 hours, depending on which subjects you are taking. So you can dedicate this amount of time, and so this plan, it might work for you. It depends on you and depending on how you study. So some people prefer to study for like 3 hours instead of them studying for maybe like bits, maybe 2 hours per day. So it depends on you, but this is a very good plan that we suggest to our students. Another general tip is that you need to remove distractions. These distractions may be social media, maybe in the form of like things that are not very important. You need to prioritize So 2 hours session with a break is better than 2 hours without break in terms of productivity. So if you are studying for a 2-hour session, then you can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes break in between a 2-hour session. Next, please. At JAMB Tutor, we offer 5 subjects right now, which are English, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and biology. And hopefully we'll be adding some other subjects, especially science subjects like geography, further mathematics, and agricultural sciences. Next, please. So the focus of JAMB Tutor is STEM subjects. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We still offer English because it's a compulsory subject in the JAMB exams, but we mainly focus on science subjects. Next, please. So as regards to the JAMB prep resources, we have Elim Tutor YouTube page. All the content that's on our YouTube page is free. You can have access to it. And here we have a sample recording. The second resource that you should use is the past paper questions, the JAMB past paper questions. And as you will come
first of all, we have an overview here for the JAMB biology syllabus.
Answer the past paper questions according
You'll
to
see
the
that
topics,
it's actually divided into
like
5 sections.
Physics, chemistry, and biology.
We have ecology, and ecology has to do with the soil. It has to do with interactions of living things, both with themselves and with the environment. Then we have evolution, which has to do with changes that occur in living organisms over a long period of time. And this can lead to the formation of new species. We are also going to look at the evidence for evolution, the things that scientists look at before coming up with the theories that we have today concerning evolution. Then we have heredity and variation. And as far as this is concerned, we're looking at the inheritance of genes. We're looking at variation within populations. Variation, by the way, has to do with the differences that occur between members of the same species. Now, on our right-hand side, we have variety of organisms, and in this particular context, we'll be looking at the different classes of living organisms, from the simplest life forms to the most complex life forms. We would also be looking at form and function. Under this particular section, we'll be looking at the characteristics of living things. We'll be looking at the different systems that are involved in these different characteristics. We'll be looking at the functions of each of these systems. So, study tips. As far as study tips are concerned, for every student that is trying to study for JAMB biology, you need to take into consideration the fact that you're dealing with a subject that is very wide, and so you need information. You need to have as much information as possible. So the first study tip would be to study as much as possible. To help you with certain areas that you may not be very clear about, or perhaps you've not been able to study very well, if you understand how words are constructed to an extent, you can figure out the answers to those kinds of questions. Because basically in biology, words are constructed either from Latin root words, from Greek root words, or from English words. And if you understand how these words are constructed, for instance, it gives you an insight into what the likely answer would be. You need your mind maps or charts. This is actually meant to serve as triggers to remember certain sections of your notes or even your textbook. The most important thing is never wait until the last moment. For a subject that is rich in information, you need to take things easy. You need to have a very good study plan so that you read at your own pace. Waiting till the last minute means that you're going to have an information overload. And but if you go into the examination hall like that, you're going to have a brain block. You're going to get confused. So the most important thing is the moment you enter your senior secondary level, you should start preparing for your final JAMB exams. Relate what you have learned. One thing that makes it easier to recollect concepts taught in biology is when you can relate what you have learned in class to what obtains in the real world. Biology is a very visual subject, so it is very easy for you to find relationships between the osmosis, the diffusion, that you're dealing in class with what obtains in the larger world. Then finally, get to understand how to answer questions, because this will also help you. It is not enough for you to read notes and textbooks or to mine information from online platforms. You need to have an understanding of how to answer questions. Now, the JAMB biology exam is not theory based, but there are certain elements of theory style questions that you may need to prepare for. There are also certain elements of practical based questions that you will need to prepare for, and I would expatiate on this in the next slide. So, answering questions in biology, you have quite a number of different questions that are posed in front of you when you are doing your biology exam. There are what I call process questions, and the process questions, as far as I'm concerned, are questions that have to do with sequences. For instance, if you're trying to answer a question on respiration, do not look at the options. First of all, try and draw out the sequence even before looking at the options. What is the pathway for oxygen, for instance? It's going to the nose, it's going to the trachea, from the trachea to the bronchus, from the bronchus to the bronchioles, from the bronchioles to the alveoli, and then from the alveoli into the capillary. So you need to write this out first before even looking at the options. Then there's what I call the literary questions. The literary questions are actually more like comprehension passages, and they are essentially testing your understanding of whether you know what is said versus what should have been said. Are you able to distinguish between two very close answers, or are you able to pick out the correct answer by spotting a particular error or contradiction in one of the options? These kinds of questions are no longer in vogue, but you never can tell with JAMB assessors. But in any case, what you should take away from the literary question is that you should have enough comprehension of English to be able to spot when there's a contradiction in a particular option. Then you have terminology questions. Terminology questions, like I've already hinted in the previous slides, are based on word construction. In biology, there are quite a lot of words that have Latin, Greek, or even English root words. If you hear, for instance, the word cryptograms, the word cryptogram has the word crypt, and crypt means to be hidden. So it gives you an idea that you're dealing with, in this particular context, you're dealing with plants that have something that is hidden. And when you look at the other information, you should be able to know that they are actually talking about plants that have their seeds hidden. Now, let's look at flat questions, for instance. The flat questions are questions that on the surface, all of them seem to be very correct. They can be very reminiscent of the literary question. So what the examiner is actually testing is, do you have in-depth understanding of the concept that they are testing? Because, for instance, if they are asking you a question that demands your understanding, your deep understanding of mitosis, a lot of students, for instance, take it for granted that when you talk about mitosis, when you talk about binary fission, for instance, in bacteria, a lot of students think that you're talking about mitosis simply because the new daughter cells are like the parent cells. But if you understand that mitosis is a nuclear division, you know that bacteria dividing by binary fission is not a mitotic event, simply because bacteria in itself is not an eukaryote. It doesn't have a nucleus. So for you to engage in mitosis, it means you must have a nucleus. Then we move on to the practical based questions. Now, some people might wonder, why are we having practical based questions in a multiple choice based exam? As science students, you should be able to have a good understanding of scientific concepts, and then you should have the ability to predict the outcome of events. So that is why you do have an infusion of practical based questions in JAMB biology. And these questions are not very difficult. They are basically testing your understanding of concepts. Also, in addition, you have questions that have to do with graphs, and these questions are testing your ability to interpret and evaluate data the same way you will do probably in mathematics and economics. Now, general points. For objective questions, you usually, or should I say most times, may not need to have all the information at your fingertips. You can always work from what you know and eliminate the answers that do not sound logical. But like I always say, the more information you have, the clearer the correct option will appear. So for practical based questions, like I've already said, these are testing your understanding of concepts and your predictive power. So as a whole, what the examiner is actually after is your ability to think critically. So there are a few questions that students may have as far as JAMB biology. Some students may want to know, how do I study for biology in a span of 2 months? At this particular time, what it means is that you should have your jotters, you should have your mind maps, you should have your past questions. This is not the time to be heavily invested in absorbing new material. So what you should be doing is trying as much as possible to remember all the things that you have learned in the past. Of course, every now and then, you may make occasional references to your class notes or your textbooks if there are certain areas you have totally forgotten. Which of the sections highlighted are the most relevant for the exam? Now, naturally, you would always have questions that have to do with classification of living organisms. But beyond that, you shouldn't take any topic for granted, because for most multiple choice exams, you have 40, 50 to 60 questions. So this allows the examiner to ask you as many questions as possible. It also means that he can pick questions from almost all the areas within the syllabus. As far as JAMB biology is concerned, you know that 1 mark can be the difference between your admission into your university of choice. So you try as much as possible to cover all the topics. The exam in itself is like a chess game, because the assessors are always trying to outsmart the student. You know, from time to time, these assessors, they look at the exams, they look at the questions in the previous year, they look at areas probably that they have not focused very well on, and they try to make for these areas in the next exam. Of course, they can also have it at the back of their minds that students will be like, okay, fine, they have already set enough questions in this area, it would not come out in the next exam. So just as the assessors are playing a chess game, the students must understand how these people reason and try as much as possible to prepare in advance so that they are not surprised when they get into the exam hall. Okay, have I got to know how to draw some diagrams in JAMB biology, or knowing the diagrams and labels is sufficient? Well, since this is not a theory-based exam, there's no need to know how to draw diagrams. All you need to know is the labels, the different parts of living organisms or apparatus that you're going to be tested on. How many hours do you suggest, or can I just study haphazardly? Now, studying for JAMB biology, like any other exam, depends on a number of factors. It depends on how much you've covered. It depends on the best time that you get the best out of yourself when you study. And then it depends on what you really want to achieve. So there are a number of factors. When you put all these three factors together, that will give you a very good evaluation of how many hours you need to spend in study. Some people may be able to study for 3 hours in a day, which means that by day 5, they have studied for a total of 15 hours. Some people, probably an hour a day. For such people, they would have to study the whole week. And then some people 2 hours, it depends. So like I normally say, you have to find, first of all, the best time to study. You have to look at, as you're studying, how much ground are you covering? And then what exactly is your goal? Because that will most likely be the driving force, the major driving force in how many hours you are studying. Does answering past paper questions alone suffice to ace JAMB biology? Well, the past question papers are meant to actually improve your processing speed. They are meant to give you an insight into how JAMB sets their questions, okay? But they are not a replacement for your notes or your textbooks or the information you get from online. They are not a replacement for that. They are essentially meant for quality assurance purposes. If you have practiced enough past questions, it means that one, you have a very good idea of the areas you are weak in. You have already prepared in advance concerning the kind of questions that they are going to ask you. But keep in mind that the fact that you've practiced a lot of questions does not necessarily mean that these questions will come out. What it means is that mentally, psychologically, you are prepared for those type of questions, and then you already know the areas that you are weak in, and you would have prepared in advance for those areas. So that's what you get out of practicing past questions. Thank you.
Before we move on to mathematics, I'm just going to take a few seconds to introduce to you who Mr. Shogun is. Mr. Shogun has been teaching biology for the past 15 years, and he's still pursuing a postgraduate degree from the University of South Wales. So to begin with JAMB mathematics, this is just a mind map. I have uploaded a recording of the JAMB syllabus for mathematics. And as you can see from the screen, the JAMB mathematics syllabus is divided into 5 sections. The first is the number enumeration, and under number enumeration you have about 4 topics. And then comes algebra, which is a very broad and wide topic. There is polynomials, variation, progression. This is where you study arithmetic and geometric progression. This is also called sequences and series. Binary operation, matrices and determinants. I should also say that as we'll come to see this in the next slide. And then the third section is the geometry section. It's comprised of 5 subtopics: Euclidean geometry, mensuration. This is where you study polygons, quadrilaterals. And the next one is loci. This is a very short topic. Coordinate geometry. This talks about lines of equations. It talks about like Cartesian plane. And then the last one is trigonometry. This is where you study the different trigonometric identities, such as the sine, cosine, and tangent. The second to the last is the statistics. This is one of the easiest topics. Under statistics, there is the representation of data, methods of location, methods of dispersion. Methods of location are like examples of methods of location are mean, median, and mode. Methods of dispersion include standard deviation, variance, and range. The methods of dispersion measure the degree at which the data is dispersed. So that's what essentially methods of dispersion does. The next one is permutation and combination, and then probability. So amongst these 5 statistics topics, permutation and combination and probability seem to be the hardest, but we'll do our best to explain them in the easiest way. Yeah, so in the next couple of days, Ismail, who is one of our teachers, he's a very good mathematician. He's currently studying in Russia, and he actually, back in 2012, he's my classmate. He won the cowbell competition for the whole country. So he's very good in mathematics and also in teaching. And then the last topic is the calculus. Under calculus, we'll study differentiation. This is also called derivatives, applications of differentiation, and integration. Next slide, please. So just like I alluded to at the very beginning of this session, we suggest to our students to study based on the topics. So this is just like this is an example. For mathematics, from 1978 to 2012, I'm not very sure. I think it's to 2012 or to 2020. There are 488 questions from geometry and trigonometry. And on algebra, there are 455 questions. Number on numerations has 392 questions. Statistics has 250, and calculus has 100 questions. And if you check the average, then it differs. So for example, calculus might have 2 or 3 questions every year. So for you to succeed in JAMB mathematics, then it's recommended that you start with, say for example, algebra. It depends. If you like geometry, then it's good that you start with geometry, because especially if you are just 2 months away from the exams. So you can start with geometry and trigonometry and then move on to algebra. At Elim Tutor, we are actually going to start with number and numerations because it's very short and it also has a considerable number of questions. So we'll start with number and numerations, then we'll go on to explain algebra. Geometry is the third, statistics, and then the last one will be calculus. Next, please. Moving on to JAMB physics. This is also a mind map. The reason why we use mind maps is that it's a proven teaching tool that's very good for students, especially when it comes to revision. So under JAMB physics, there are six subtopics. The first one is mechanics. Under mechanics, you study units and measurements, vectors and scalars, the differences between vectors and scalars, motion, and motion is in different dimensions, motion in 1 dimension, motion in 2 dimensions, such as projectiles. The fourth is momentum and impulse. The fifth is dynamics, equilibrium and moment, work and energy. The second is modern physics. This is where you study radioactivity. This is modern physics has to do with atom. It's it's similar in many ways to chemistry, modern physics. The next is electricity and magnetism. So this is where you study electrostatics. You study the Coulomb forces, when you have 2 different electric charges and that there is a force that's attracting them if they are of different signs. So if you have negative and positive, then they attract. They come they attract. While if they are the same, then they repel. The second is electric current. We'll speak about Ohm's law and the different laws, magnetism and electromagnetism. This is where we speak about Faraday's laws of electromagnetic induction. The next is AC circuits. AC stands for alternating current. Yeah, this comes at the very end of electricity and magnetism in most of the textbooks. And there are just a very few questions on AC circuits. And it's actually very easy because it involves just substituting into the formula. So you'll be given a question, you just write the given data, the different quantities that you are given, and then you just substitute into the formula. So this is very easy, even though it looks hard to many students, but it's actually easy. The next is the conduction of electricity through fluids. This is where we'll study electrolysis, Faraday's law of electrolysis, and then the last one is electronics. This is just a very basic introduction into electronics. This is where we study semiconductors. The fourth section is, that's on the left, is waves. Under waves, we'll study wave motion, electromagnetic waves, and sound waves. Electromagnetic waves propagate without a material medium. So just like the waves that come from the sun or the radiation of the sun, this is termed as infrared rays. So this is it doesn't need any material medium. And then the second one is the third is sound waves. Sound waves is a mechanical wave which needs a material medium before it can propagate. The fifth section under JAMB physics is optics, light and optics. Yeah, light and optics, this is where we study mirrors. We study the different types of mirrors, convex mirror and concave mirror. And then the last one is heat and thermodynamics. Under heat, we'll discuss about heat and temperature, fluid mechanics, and then the gas laws. Gas laws will also be tackled under chemistry. So if you learned, but it's good to learn both actually, because in just like I've explained in the pre-recorded sessions, let's take for example pressure. Pressure is given so many different units. So it's given the unit of torrent, it's given the unit of millimeter mercury, bar, there are so many actually, and Pascal, of course. Pascal is mostly used in physics calculations, while if you go to chemistry, you'll see millimeter mercury, torrent, atmospheric. There's also atmospheric, ATM. So there's so many different units for pressure. So it's good to study gas laws under physics, and at the same time also study them under chemistry. And I think they are more elaborate on in chemistry. So they are more elaborate. You'll discuss about the different laws, Charles' law, the general gas equation, the ideal gas equation. While in physics, it's limited to Charles' law and Boyle's law and the general gas equation. Next, please. So before we move on to the next topic that we have on the screen is English, and tutor Gita is going to go through English. She's a graduate of Swansea University. She did her undergraduate and masters, and she had first class. And in her masters, she got distinction, which is really unheard of in Nigeria. It's hard for you to get first class in English. And she has also worked with the university in helping non-native English speakers. So can you please, without further ado, can you start please?
Preparation and study skills for English JAMB exam. There are 4 main parts of the English exam that test your knowledge and understanding in different aspects of the English language. You need to acquire in-depth knowledge in oral English, English grammar, lexis and structure, as well as show good grasp of comprehension tasks that are related to a specific reading material. Now, to understand how to prepare for this complex exam, you need to understand the aims and the goals of each individual part of the exam. Therefore, you need to familiarize yourself with the learning objectives that match the aspect of the language that is assessed through this test. Thus, I'd like to emphasize that the overall aims of this test are to identify whether the learner can master an effective communication in spoken and written English, and if he or she has a sound knowledge in linguistics to be able to study at the tertiary level, which is higher education. That is, if you want to study at the university. Basically, you need to have a certain level of English to be able to express yourself and understand what has been communicated to you in English in your chosen subject area that you would like to achieve a degree in. In terms of other individual parts of this exam, for lexis and structure objectives, you need to be able to recognize and identify words and expressions, ordinary, figurative, and idiomatic. You need to be able to distinguish between similar and opposite meanings, as well as identify the correct or incorrect, punctuation and spelling, be able to identify grammatical forms and why to use them and how to use them, as well as the sentence structure and meaning conveyed, when the sentences are built differently. In terms of the comprehension task, the assessor wants to see whether you can recognize topic sentences, main points in the context, in the text given during your exam, whether you are able to identify implied meaning of words, sentences, parts of the sentences. You need to be able to recognize grammatical functions of words, phrases, and clauses, and to see the figurative and idiomatic meaning of them. And then you need to be able to identify or infer writer's mood, attitude, opinion, and intention. In terms of the oral part of the exam, you need to know that the objectives would be to test your knowledge of different vowels, consonant types, the use of the correct accent, and the connected speech. To give you more specific examples, I would like to emphasize that there are a variety of subsections for each of the aspects that need to be covered in the exam practice. As you can see in this diagram, in the oral part of the test, you've got several subsections, as well as in the English grammar and lexis and structure, as well as the comprehension. So you need to be able to identify different types of English grammar and variety of understanding in terms of different types of words and phrases, their form and function in a sentence, such as nouns and verbs, adjectives, adverbials, is necessary. In terms of English grammar, you mustn't overlook the punctuation and the sentence structure. In terms of lexis and structure, you mustn't overlook the concord, which is how the words work together to convey the meaning, and what is the order of the words in a sentence to convey the accurate meaning. As well as in comprehension tasks, you need to be prepared to read and understand what has been conveyed through the text. So different aspects to be practiced, different aspects to be learned, to be able to identify what is needed for this exam preparation. Well, there is also a suggested general structure to understand how is the exam set, and what type of questions you are going to face. That will help you reduce your anxiety about the test and perform on the test day much more effectively. So we are going to look at suggested general structure of the exam, which is based on the exam papers from the previous years, so you know what you need to prepare yourself for, or what you're going to face on the day roughly. In terms of comprehension, you might be asked about 5 questions after you have read a passage. Then you are going to be asked about 10 questions for 2 reading materials, so 5 questions each. Then you might be asked about 10 questions which relates to closed passage, where you will have to choose the correct word to insert into a sentence to complete the most accurate meaning. Then you might be asked about 5 questions that would show your understanding in interpreting sentences and the meaning. Then you might be asked about 15 questions related to the opposite meaning of the words or phrases, and the same amount of questions related to similar meaning of the words or phrases. Then you will be asked to complete sentences with the appropriate words or phrases, and then you will be tested on your oral forms, how you can recognize the same vowels or different vowels, consonants, and the correct stress as well. To cover all these different aspects of the subject, you need to make sure you are specific when you study and you are specific when you revise. You are spending a measurable amount of time on all the aspects, and you are making small goals along the way, because obviously you have to cover lots of material, and you make sure that you have attainable goals, and make sure that you study the relevant material and you invest the time. So you need to make sure you study smart to be able to achieve the marks that you desire. To give you some general study tips, I'd like to emphasize that you need to spend some time to plan your studies and your revision. Time is everything, as you know. You've got 2 months to prepare for your exams, around 2 months. You need to make sure that you use variety of strategies and you practice variety of strategies to help you to study. For example, you can use mind maps, flowcharts, diagrams, notes, cue cards. You need to make sure that you constantly revise what you have learned and that you chunk the amount and the material of the knowledge that you need to acquire. Cramming, meaning learning everything in the last minute, never helps, because you might feel overwhelmed and you might feel that you are stressed and that it's too late and there is no point of doing it. That's why you need to take steps to reach that summit, one at a time. You need to make sure that you schedule a reading timetable and you have a study plan that you stick to. Make sure you do have some breaks in between your study time, so you are refreshed every time when you revise or learn something new. Make sure you use exam-focused papers and don't just randomly study anything and everything, just opening randomly a book and just taking few passages from the book. You need to focus. You need to be studying with the purpose to be able to achieve and master this subject. You need to make sure that you prepare adequately, so give yourself the time to study. If it helps, you can form study groups with your friends and make sure you practice daily, because nothing like practice helps you to acquire the knowledge that you need. And make sure that you understand that the way to success is dependent on the combination of factors, many factors, and you can use a variety of strategies to reach it. Make sure you stay confident and positive as well. That will help you to learn more and revise more and be more motivated. If it helps, explain your answers to other people in your study groups, your family members, your friends, and make sure you study all the individual parts of the English paper, that you cover oral part, grammar, lexis and structure, as well as the comprehension, as you know that you will have to face quite a few questions during the exam. Thank you for watching. I hope this helps. Stay focused, stay positive, stay motivated, and you will do your best and achieve what you desire. Thank you for being with Ilim Tutor, the general study tips and the exam preparation for JAMB.
So if you have any questions about Ilim Tutor, then please you can contact us via admin@ilimtutor.com. Alternatively, you can contact us via WhatsApp at 081-311-77533. Thank you for joining this session. Until next time, goodbye.